The presidency of the United States had become the most influential and powerful position in world politics toward the beginning of the 20th century. The president is normally seen as the icon and representative of the entire nation, upon whom the great resentment of other countries usually falls. Assassins and would-be assassins believe that the downfall of the nation's leader can bring forth sympathy for a cause or create a terrorism-like effect on the nation's citizens. The former is almost never the case, and the latter is generally overswept by a national unification in the face of crisis. Although a president is usually targeted for a specific belief or moral that shows through in presidential policy and is deemed ridiculous by a large minority, Harry Truman was the only president targeted for policy towards an individual American territory. In the early 1900s, the Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico gained power and influence with Albizu Campos as its leader, their objective an independent Puerto Rico. Then, in November of 1950, two nationalists who were literally raised in radicalism attempted an assassination on Truman, who happened to be in the most physically vulnerable circumstances of any modern president at any time. An intensely fascinating series of events followed, as are now here accounted. At 7:30 on October 31st, 1950, two young gentlemen arrived at Union Station in Washington, D.C., and walked to the nearby Hotel Harris, where they registered under their own names. The front desk clerk, noting their new suits, surmised that the tall one was a divinity student. Actually, the two polite guests were Puerto Rico terrorists who had come to Washington to kill President Harry S. Truman, and with wiser planning and better luck, they might have succeeded.
The would-be assassins were part of the small, volatile Puerto Rican Nationalist Party headed by Pedro Albizu Campos, who was a Harvard graduate who joined the Army in World War I. Now, the American Army was intensely racist at the time, and this rubbed onto the impressionable Campos a great deal. Having been raised in Puerto Rico, he became a bitter advocate of the American territory's independence through terrorist means.
The Nationalist Party did not initially have a whole lot of support under Campos, mainly due to some very reconciliatory actions by President Roosevelt, which lost the party many seats in the Puerto Rican government. But strangely, the few violent insurrections through bombings, assassinations, and fights with the police, while not quite helping public opinion, caused fanatical dedication to the faithful, who happened to have much resources at their disposal. When the lead assassin, Graciela Torresola, headed the cause, he was able to purchase arms for an attempted coup.
Torresola's radicalism was almost inbred, as his family was closely involved with every Puerto Rican revolution for a century. Torresola became a leader of the Nationalist Party and worked from New York, organizing an insurrection in Puerto Rico that attempted the assassination of its governor. When this failed, his sister was wounded, and his brother imprisoned for life. This caused the desperation that led to the assassination attempt on Truman.
With Torresola in basically a state of distress and dismay, he was ready to give his life for the cause. His motive for assassinating Truman was actually very foolish, showing his obvious mental disarray. He felt that the death of Truman might lead to an American revolution that would provide the Nationalists with an opportunity to lead Puerto Rico to independence. So he advocated killing the president of a 100 million people nation to gain the independence of a small territory. But he was a very impassioned man. So he recruited another passionate nationalist, Oscar Collazo, also in New York at the time, and in a matter of a day or two, he decides to go and assassinate the president.
President Harry S. Truman was inaugurated in early 1945. After Roosevelt's term, Truman was handed the problem of the end of World War II with Japan and the questionable use of the two atomic bombs. After an extremely urgent request to the Japanese to surrender was refused, Truman ordered nuclear bombs to be dropped on two war-mobilized cities of Japan. Although this was controversial and must have been emotionally painful to the president to order such a large loss of human life, it effectively ended the war. After World War II, Truman was faced with the communist expansion of the Soviet Union. He was the creator of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan to curb the expansion of communism in the world, a policy evidenced in the future by the Vietnam War. As far as his involvement in Puerto Rican policy, there is not much to be said. The assassins were not specifically angered by Truman at all. He just happened to be present at the time. So, on Tuesday, October 31st, 3 days after the October 28th failed coup, Collazo met Torrisolo in his office. They then went out and bought new suits and handbags, said fond farewells to their families, and purchased one-way tickets to Washington, D.C., where they would do their planning and then their attempted assassination.
Those two assassins were extremely lucky in their timing. While planning, they learned that the president was not even staying in the White House at the time. He was actually staying with his family a few houses away from the White House and across the street at the Blair Lee Mansion while the White House was being renovated. The two would only have planned a little more carefully, they could have actually succeeded. Never in the modern presidency has the president been more weakly guarded by the number of security personnel or by the security of his residence.
In 1948, when inspectors discovered dangerous structural flaws in the White House, the decision was made to move the first family to the Blair Mansion until repairs could be completed. Of course, this seemed perfect for everyone except for the security guards charged with ensuring Truman's safety. But while the White House was guarded by iron fences, a huge patrol lawn, and tight security, the Blair House was on a busy street and was separated by only 5 feet of grass, a hedge, and a railing from Pennsylvania Avenue, and the doors were not even always locked. This was actually a very careless situation.
The Blair Lee Mansion actually consisted of 2 townhouses, named for their Civil War-era residents, Montgomery Blair and Admiral Samuel Phillips Lee, which had been combined into a single unit. Having been 2 separate residences, Blair House had 2 front doors, each at the top of a short flight of steps leading up from the sidewalk, and accompanied by railings on either side. There were also 2 other entrances, accessed by steps and narrow walkways at each end of the building. They led from the sidewalk to service doors that were used by the household staff and the president's guards. The larger front stairs and front door to the east, or Blair House, were used by the president and his guards, and a guard was always stationed at the bottom step. Just inside this door, another guard stood with a machine gun within reach. Another 2 guards stood in sentry booths in front of each basement door on the sidewalk. 2 other guards moved wherever necessary, and another guard handled duties inside the house.
All the guards carried pistols and were expert marksmen. 4 of them on duty that day were members of the White House Police, recruited from the Washington Metropolitan Police. The remaining 3 were part of the Secret Service. All the men had performed well in other jobs, had served in the armed forces, and were proud of their assignments. President Truman owes his life to the actions of the men who were guarding him that day.